My name is Dave Fox. I'm a travel writer. I live in Vietnam in Ho Chi Minh City, and right now I'm on the largest island in the Côn Đảo Archipelago. The pier that I'm sitting on is called Pier 914, and it got that name because 914 political prisoners died in the construction of this pier. They were doing forced labor, and the conditions were so harsh that nearly 1,000 people died just to build this one pier that we're sitting on. We hired a tour guide. Her name is Vong, and she is right now the only English-speaking tour guide on the island, I was told. And we got some motorbikes, and she took me all over the island and really gave me a clear picture of the full scope of things, which is hard to crunch together. We went down to the port, and it's this bustling area where all the supplies for the island come in. There is a ferry. It's pretty rough sea crossing, but there's a ferry that comes in and out of the island for travelers. We took a little boat out to a floating houseboat, and these people live on, it's kind of like a giant raft. And they have a little restaurant there with 3 or 4 tables and just tons of fresh seafood that has just been plucked out of the water. And you know, the freshest lobster I think I've ever had in my life. We're sitting out in the middle of the South China Sea, or the East Sea as the Vietnamese call it. The scenery here is amazing, and so just taking in all the scenery was fantastic. I had heard that Côn Đảo just didn't have a lot of tourists. It didn't have a lot of mainstream visitors. It's a unique place. I think there aren't many islands in the world these days that are relatively accessible from a mainland city. And you've got empty beaches, white sands, turquoise waters. It's really kind of a hideaway. And it's the kind of place that on the surface, a lot of travelers look for. But there's a reason why there's not a lot of tourism here. There's a reason why the islanders have chosen not to turn it into a party destination. And that's because there were some just horrific things that have happened here over the last couple of centuries. The prisons were chilling. I had heard that they were here. I knew they were here. But until you see them, you really can't fathom the horrors that people went through. We saw 3 different prisons, and the so-called tiger cages where people were held and tortured. They were used to house what they called the most difficult prisoners, those who were the most boisterous and causing the most trouble. Some of the tiger cages were built by the French, and then there were later ones built during the American period here. But these were small rooms that housed about maybe 5 or 6 people in each one. Very little space. And they had an upper grating, like bars on top. And then there's an upper floor where the prison guards could, from above, torture the inmates. They had these big sticks that they would just beat them with. And one of the most horrific things we saw, they had buckets of lime, the chemical, and they would mix lime and water and throw it on the prisoners, and it would burn their skin. The original prison was built by the French in 1861, and it was the French, during the French colonial period, they administered the prisons until they left in 1954, and at that point, they were turned over to the South Vietnamese Army. And during that time, they had American advisors. There were people in the prisons, American military, who were aware of the conditions, and they really were kept a secret. In 1970, a U.S. government delegation came, and they had a planned tour, and they had an American leading them around. One of the larger prisons had a church inside of it. There was a dining area, there was a barber shop, they had vegetable gardens. These were things that were built for show in case people showed up, to try to portray the prisons as more humane places than they actually were. But this U.S. government delegation also had a map that a former prisoner had drawn for them, showing them how to get into this area known as the tiger cages. So the delegation basically managed to slip away and get off of the planned route through the prison and get in and see what was really going on there. And they saw all of these emaciated prisoners that were shackled. The stench from human excrement was almost overpowering. They had evidence that there had been a lot of beatings going on, and the prisoners started calling out to them, begging for water. They were so dehydrated. They didn't know who they were, but they hoped that maybe it was someone who was coming to finally see how they were being treated. On this particular island, there are a lot of people who believe it's haunted, with so many people who died in such unspeakable ways. There's just a belief among some people that it's haunted by the former political prisoners.
Is it haunted?
Whether you believe in ghosts or not, you can't deny that this island is haunted in some way. There's an energy here. On one level, it feels peaceful and it feels serene, but to me, the whole time I've been here, once I understood the history, there's just a weight that I feel being here that has settled over the island. So in that sense, absolutely, it's haunted. I feel haunted by it, and I'm never going to forget what I've seen here. You don't see a lot of mainstream tourism here, but you do see a lot of Vietnamese people from the mainland. They come to honor all of the prisoners who have died here. About 20,000 people died over the couple of centuries in these prisons. Ancestor worshiping the dead is a big thing in Vietnam. And so they will go to the cemetery at midnight. And I went there last night at around midnight.
What is it that happens at night?
The Vietnamese always want to go to the cemetery because they think in the middle of night that's a good time for the dead people hear their wishes.
There were probably about 300 people out there, and this happens every single night. They go, they pray, they burn incense, they burn offerings to give to those who have died. They bring food, they bring clothing, and they burn it, and the smoke, they believe, brings it up to the prisoners. The focal point of all of this is the gravesite of a teenage martyr. Her name was Vo Thị Sao, and she was a Vietnamese schoolgirl who became a guerrilla fighter against the French governors in the early 1940s. At age 19, she was captured, and she was the first female to be executed on Côn Đảo for her political activities. But she's considered a hero among many Vietnamese today. So there's just this huge gathering that happens every single night at her gravesite at midnight, and it's pretty amazing to see. There's a real dichotomy here, and it is at times difficult to reconcile because it does have such a troubled past. But at the same time, Côn Đảo is a place that a lot of travelers dream of finding. There's not a lot of tourism going on here. You've got virtually empty beaches. It has some of the best scuba diving and snorkeling anywhere in Vietnam, and it's got great hiking. Parts of the island are very mountainous, and so there's some great little day treks you can do. It's a more challenging place to travel because it doesn't have quite as developed of an infrastructure as you find in a lot of places. It's not the kind of beach town where you've got, beach bars and restaurants lining the sands and things like that. There's not a lot of English spoken here, so getting around can take a little extra time. If you are looking for a party island, Côn Đảo is not the place, but it is a place to come if you are interested in history and human rights. And it's a great place to just come unwind and catch your breath. It's hands down the most serene place that I've been anywhere in Vietnam, if not Southeast Asia as a whole. As difficult as it's been to learn about the history, I'm going to be back.